And we are live and we are back. Let's go. I'm Cory, your host. One app according to FinallyFit podcast, and I'm back. And I got 11 up, like I never left with another installment of Money Mindset here on According to FinallyFit podcast. We discuss health and wealth, finance and fitness, and everything in between. We're gonna make sure you save more and save less and keep making better your best. Yes, yes. However, when my coach Jordan went on paternity leave, we started these Wealth Wednesdays, formerly known as Wealth Wednesdays, now known as Money Mindset, where we get straight to the financial information, no filler in between. And I know y'all see the topic of today's video. We're going to get into squatters' rights or the lack thereof, or do they have too many? If you haven't been seeing what's been going on, I'd probably say it's been blowing up more since the moratorium has ended, since the panorama as far as the eviction moratorium. But what's going on with some of these places when it comes to squatters' rights or, you know, being able to evict people, um, you know, out of your, no, I say your house, not your primary residence, but your rental property, it is unreal what's going on here in some of these states. So we're gonna get into that. This is gonna be, I say older articles. Y'all know I'm be trying to get to the articles. There's been so much stuff going on. I'm sort of like on the down slope of all these extracurricular things that I've been having to do, like for like my family. Got my wife 100% PNT, passed my AWS Solutions Architect Associate. So now I'm like, I took a break as far as like the last week or so, but now I got to start ramping back up and got to start getting this content back out to you guys on a more consistent basis. And I may or may not have a surprise for y'all on not this episode, but the next episode. Jordan and I may be syncing back up and getting back on schedule as well. So we might get back to that health side of the health and wealth conversation on According to FinallyFit podcast. Jordan, like, man, I've been gone for over a year. I'm like, look, man, you just let me know when you ready to sync up. You know, I know what you got going on, but we got the equipment both sides. We virtual now, so whenever you got time, we got time. And I think Jordan and I found a good time in both our schedules to sync up. So that's going to be on the way for y'all. But before we get started, y'all know what to do. Comment, like, share, and subscribe. Shout out to the YouTube algorithm. Make sure you leave those rating reviews on the podcast platforms as well. My information as well as my co-host Jordan information can be found in the description on YouTube. And last but not least, this is for entertainment purposes only. Myself, no Jordan, fitness for finance professionals. Anything here is for entertainment purposes only. You need to seek out professional and do your own research before taking any action. All right. And again, monthly car payment, no updates, still $735 for new and $523 for used because it's the first episode of July. Hope everyone had a safe and great 4th of July. And again, nothing for student loans. I'll have to find something for student loans later on. Maybe that next episode I do with Jordan, maybe I'll talk about student loans, but I still got to find some student loan stuff if it's even relevant right now still. All right. Shout out to the presidential election that's going on. President Trump, President Biden. All right, y'all. Let's get into it. Squatters' rights, right? Too much, too little. Depends on what state it is, obviously, when it comes to squatters' rights. But we're going to get into it. If I can share the screen, y'all know it takes me all day to share the screen. Here we go. Boom. Anxiety over squatters fueled by TikTok inspires a wave of legislation. This is on State Line. Oh, shout out to State Line. This is by Robbie Securia, April 26, 2024. So not even 3 months yet. So I feel good. Not even 3 months behind. It's still quote unquote like in a quarter of me reporting on this. If I say I'm a reporter. Anyways, opponents of the bills call the trend a manufacturer crisis that could affect legitimate tenant protections. Long story short, if you haven't been seeing this, there have been situations, I mean, whether it's a rental property or, someone's parent has passed, anything like that, or someone's been out of town for a long time, or however you want to slice it, there are people, they're called squatters, they're I won't say moving in, but for layman's terms, they move into homes and once they are in there for a significant period of time, they in short become tenants, even though they're squatters, and it can take months, if not years, and a lot of money to get them evicted, just the way the laws are set up. All right. And they're essentially using, you know, tenant rights to be able to stay in these properties. Sorry, here we go. Squatting is not the answer. A Los Angeles resident left set a banner on her home fence reading, all right, squatting answer. Across the street of a formerly vacant home. Right, these homes are vacant that have been recently taken over by a group of homeless mothers. Ooh, in 2020. See, so this goes back to 2020. 4 years later, a controversial TikTok has ignited the issue of squatting, and some lawmakers want to crack down on the practice. Damian Dovergains, Associated Press. And again, sometimes people are dealing with squatters when it comes to people who do Airbnb. They Airbnb it, and then they end up overstaying and they end up becoming squatters. Like it's crazy some of the stuff I've seen out here. All right, here we go. Let's get started. Across various news channels and outlets, a visceral fear of some property owners that an unwanted guest could move into their vacant home, refuse to leave, and then claim ownership has been a trending story. This is not a good trending story. These squatter horror stories have reached a fever pitch in the past month after a migrant TikTok influencer, Venezuelan national Lionel Monroe, encouraged people to squat in homes across the United States. Monroe was arrested in Ohio late March by federal immigration and custom enforcement officers. Okay, so this is again not even American citizens doing this, immigrants, and that's well, I don't know if they're saying these immigrants are illegal or not, but if even illegal immigrants can find a way to squat in your home, it's got to be some type of lawmaking change, right? If you're here illegally, but then you can still have protection because you're in the home based off for squatters' rights or tenants' rights, whatever, however you want to phrase it, due to these laws at the county, city, or even state level, however it's set up, based off of wherever it's at in the country, that is unreal. So far, lawmakers in at least 10 states have floated legislation this year that would address squatting by revoking tenancy rights, making it easier for police to remove squatters or making squatting a criminal offense. Several have quickly enacted new laws. A lot of times, I believe the issue is that when people call the police, I believe they say someone's, in their house or along those lines versus in short, calling the police and saying a crime has been committed, meaning someone has broken into my house, right? I believe from what I've seen, again, this is probably very state to state, maybe even city to city / county to county. But what I've seen is that, if you call the police and you don't say, a crime has been committed, they can't just show up and kick the person out if there isn't paperwork on either side saying that the person, quote unquote, can't be there, right? It sounds like the assumption is that the person, in short, innocent until proven guilty. You got to prove that they can't be there. And in short, that means you got to end up going to court, right? I mean, what proof do you have? Like you don't have to have paperwork to live somewhere, right? When it's not, not an apartment, right? And so my assumption is based off of how all these things, all these issues are going on across various states. But if you're just living somewhere, right? In short, if you move into someone's house, well, then they let you stay there, and there's no paperwork, they can't just. The laws are set up to where you can't just kick them out. And I believe it's around like 30 days or so. Like, you can't kick them out. And then where's the proof of how long they've been there, right? And then how do you prove when they entered, as far as how long they've been staying there? You can't change the locks, all these various type of things. It gets very intense out here. All right, the bills typically sponsored by Republicans, but often garnering bipartisan support, come at the time of heightened housing anxiety. Also, too, I mean, they're a pro uh, tenant cities, and then vice versa, obviously, like pro landlord cities or states, right? All depends on where you're at. The shortage of housing is worse than ever, with affordability at a new low. Meanwhile, migrant encounters at the U.S.-Mexico border reached a new monthly high in December, and nearly 80% of Americans think that the situation is either a major problem or a crisis. If people are struggling from a housing standpoint, and we know like the military, they don't have as many recruits as they want. A lot of people will know they need to just join the military. And I'm dead ass with that. Like, it'd be one of the best decisions they can make. If you don't have no resources, you're struggling financially, you're struggling to feed yourself, you're struggling for housing, you're struggling all this type of stuff, join the military. I mean, military, they'll pay for your housing, pay for a lot of stuff. You can go on deployment, make I think it's up to $100,000 before you pay taxes. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of benefits in military. Then people complain about the cost of college, military, they'll pay for you to go to college. And I mean, there's all these different type of things you can get out here. People struggling with housing loans, I mean, buying a house, you get in military. Once you get out, there's disability, you ain't gotta pay the VA's version of PMI, right? You're struggling to get a house, you don't gotta put any money down for a VA loan. I'm not saying you should do that, but I mean, the joining the military and getting your honorable discharge. Make sure you get your honorable, right? But you serve 4 years in the military and you can get an honorable discharge. I mean, there are a few things that come with more benefits, that have a better benefits package than looking at someone say, hey, you join the military and in 4 years you get this honorable. These are the things that you will have access to or may be able to get access to, depending on what, your disabilities are when you get out. It's unreal. Oklahoma State Representative Ross Ford, whose legislation advanced days after Monroe posted his TikTok video. They get some stuff, the stuff they want to get done in Congress, they get done, right? He passed some stuff in some days. Said he began thinking of posting on TikTok. That's crazy. Representative Ross Ford said he began Thinking about the issue several years ago after hearing of instances in rural areas of the state. This is Oklahoma, this state, I'm assuming. But Florida Republican also told State Line the recent wave of bills across the country is likely in response to Monroe's video. Interesting. So if you post stuff on TikTok, I guess the government's seeing that. I mean, we know how they feel about TikTok, right? Or some of them, should I say. For me, I heard complaints about squatting from property owners, accounts of individuals scouring, I don't know, newspapers for death notices in search of a place to occupy. Again, I talk about people's their parents' house, right? Their parent passes away. They're trying to do renovations. They're not trying to. They're doing renovations, right? So they can sell the house, and someone comes in, the squatter comes in, and now they can't get the squatter out. I mean, is insane. Because then how do you prove that they haven't been living there with the parent? I mean, if the parents have, I mean, it's like what? And then it gets real interesting. Like, I know this is right. Housing is different than, a vehicle. But if someone was like in my car and I called the police and someone's in my car, I need you to come get them out. I don't believe I would have to say since someone broke into my car, like they would need to be broken glass, anything like that. This is my car, right? And if I don't want somebody in my car, you need to get them up out of my car. Because if I do it, then it's against the law. If I want to do it the way I want to do it, that's why I'm calling the police to come do stuff, right? In short, the police can do things that other people, if they were to do them, it'd be against the law. So that's why I'm calling the police for y'all to come do it. But when it comes to housing, right, different laws as far as compared to a vehicle. I know I'm sort of like exaggerating, but it's the same way. I live here. This is my house, right? I have the paperwork to say that I live here. I have ownership, and I don't want them here anymore. And when you're talking about you have to go through months or years or all this money when it comes to legal fees, so the court process, this person being in your home, I'm I don't know. Because also too, let's be very clear. If you live somewhere, just produce the paperwork that you live there. If you have that these people don't have any paperwork to say they live there as far as like any type of lease or tenant agreement, and they don't have any type of mail in any type of information that this is their address now. They're not supposed to be in here, right? Not saying you can just go in there and kick them out, but if the owner, right, of the property is calling saying, "Hey, yo, I need you to get them out of here. They don't live here." I don't know what else more needs to be determined. I mean, I know what else more needs because they're saying, you got to go to court and prove all these things. But it gets, it's like, man, what? All right. Again, but when that came out, I really think this blew up. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. For the most part, squatting when someone moves into a vacant building or onto an uninhabited land is considered a civil matter, right? There we go. So it's a civil matter. That's okay. So there we go. It's a civil matter. So if you don't say a crime has been committed, right? Crime, criminal. And so police aren't empowered, right, to move someone, right? There we go. The owner's request, right? So they say they broke in, right, or something. Well, I mean, don't lie. But one way to get somebody out about your house is to say some DV happened. If you say some DV happened, there's a high percentage chance somebody's going to jail. I believe it's in California or Florida. One of those might be multiple states, but I believe it's California and or Florida. If you call the police and say some DV happened, and anybody got any type of scratches, anything like that, somebody goes to jail, like, or they at least get removed from the premises because they have so many cases, and they say, look, if you call us for DV, we got to take somebody to jail. Not that you're gonna get, I'm not say arrested or taken to jail, but somebody has got to deal with the situation. I'm about to keep calling us out here because y'all drunk and just keep fighting each other. Homeowners can file eviction notices through the courts to remove an unwanted squatter, a process that can take weeks or months. I know some people had years though. So far, Florida and West Virginia have enacted laws that classify squatting as a criminal. Look, y'all can say what you want about Florida, but man, some of these laws, I mean, Florida be moving swiftly on some of this stuff. With some of these laws, maybe because they have so much crazy stuff going on in Florida. Florida's law creates a process for sheriffs to remove squatters. Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp this week signed a similar bill into law. Florida, Georgia line. Several other states, Alabama again, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, so mostly southern states here, Republican states, have pending legislation. The anti-squatter fever also has spread to Capitol Hill, where a U.S. House bill would make squatting a deportable offense. And see, this is what I was talking about. You got the state level and you got the federal level. At the federal level, they're likely not going to do anything where they're going to, at the state level, real estate, right? It's going to be at the state level. But if you're talking about dealing with immigrants, then, that's something the federal level would be making like a blanket type of law for, where if you find an immigrant and it's not like just be deportable, so either legal or illegal, right? And they're squatting, then they're saying they'd be a deportable offense. Which this obviously be for immigrants, right? You can't deport an American citizen. I just say do deport them, right? They put them in jail, right? So as a version of deportation for citizens. Anyways, proponents of these bills have singled out migrants and immigrants in the country without authorization as squatters, frequently referring to Monroe's video, but otherwise presenting scant data to show that it is a widespread problem. Yeah, I don't know how widespread it is for migrants or immigrants. I know it's widespread in general, but I'm not saying I've seen anything a lot of migrants, immigrants about it doing it. After video evidence of their plan to take over homes emerged, we're ensuring Floridians are protected from this egregious and brazen scheme. Yeah, it's one of those things where even if it's not happening widespread, still something to put on the books because you can't be somewhere that you don't live at unless the owner says you can be there. And the fact that we have this window of time in which people you know once they stay there, if you don't tell them to leave, then the police can't kick them out because it's not a criminal offense. It's like, well, let's make it a criminal offense then. And I'm not telling people to do that, but that's some of the DV situation. Like you put people in positions where they're law-abiding citizen, they got real estate, so they're paying these tax dollars, right? Their property taxes. And now you're saying a crime has to be committed for the police to actually do something. And it's like, well, I mean, just come get them out. Right? It's a crazy situation you put people in versus trying to figure out, like, okay, figuring out people who are squatters, needing somewhere to stay. By the way, too, migrants and immigrants, if you come here, right, and by definition, you need to find somewhere to stay, you have somewhere to stay, become a squatter. I mean, that's kind of like, where are we going to put you at? Well, for people who, in short, are American citizens, they become homeless for whatever reason. Right? Let's not get into the reason, but for whatever reason, and now they become squatters. It's like you can't do that. Okay, General Ashley Moody. Okay, that was said by Helping Floridians by Florida Republican Attorney General Ashley Moody in a news release when that state's bill became law. Okay, she criticized President Joe Biden's border policy, saying, "Well, oh, border situation, my goodness." In Oklahoma, a Ford's bill would allow county sheriffs to immediately remove an alleged squatter from private property. Wow. So we're going from weeks and months to immediately. Some people dealing with years. New York City people might be dealing with for years. Like it's crazy. When this happens in Oklahoma, the process of getting an unwanted person off your property gets bogged down in civil courts. True, right? For evictions, and it may be months to get that person out of your house at 4. And by the way, too, all this stuff that people can be doing in the house, right? Because you got to come in, that clean it up. Imagine if this is your primary residence. Like some people out there believe it's their primary residence, like they went on vacation, something like that, and it's their primary house. And they can imagine one of your parents passed away, or both of them pass away, or I guess one of them had to pass away, the last one, right? And you're trying to do renovations, like you're getting all that stuff together from an estate standpoint. You might have siblings, you're grieving obviously because your parents passed away. Then you're trying to get your parents' house sold, and next thing you know, you have squatters in there, and it's like you call the police, and it's like, well, this is my house now. It was my mom and or dad's house, right? And they died. Okay, so we're getting all this stuff together. We're trying to do renovations, or we're doing renovations, and after renovations got completed, these people came in here. It's like, and then it's like, my parents have owned this house since the 60s. Why is this a conversation? And that's when like it's gonna get like really confusing. And it's unfortunate the situation that police officers get put in where it's like, look, this is a civil matter, and you didn't say they broke in. And in short, you can't change it now to say they broke in. Is just what I've seen, people say in various states. So it's crazy. That's why I remember one time as I detract, one time, this is last year, it was on the way to Jordan's birthday party last year. My wife and I were in the Starbucks line, and I made a real tight turn, right? This lady did not hit the lady, but I made this tight turn as we're turning in the Starbucks. And so then my wife and I in the Starbucks line, the lady who I had made a tight turn against, she didn't come, and I quote, she said, "I heard you hit my car." My wife and I looked at her and said, "We didn't hear anything. If you're gonna say no, if you're saying you heard us hit your car, well, we didn't hear that. Right now, it is hearsay, I guess." So I was like, okay, cool. And get out of the line. I'm looking at the car. I'm looking like, yo, I got like almost at the time like 50,000 miles in this car. You got to like show me some, paint, like clear paint getting traded. My car is blue. Her car was like that brownish color, brownish burgundy range color. And I'm like, what? She pointed like this little faint scratch, right? And she had a Acura MDX. This lady had Acura MDX, and she's trying to say like I hit like above her taillight, which is pretty high on this larger SUV. And I have Acura, a Honda Accord, a Honda Accord. She's trying to say the bottom of my bumper hit like the top of her back bumper. And I'm like, it's not even. How could they get that high? That's not even possible. And I was like, fine, like I didn't hit your car, but I'm not gonna pull off. So then, you say, there's a hit and run. So I'm gonna call the police and I'm gonna tell them, what happened. I'm like, yo, I didn't hit this lady. This lady saying I hit her. Y'all need to come up here and figure out what it is. 'Cause I mean, so sometimes, right, you need to when you call the police, you need to communicate to them in a way that they can actually do something in short where they're saying, this is a civil matter. And if you say someone broke in, then they can turn to a criminal matter and actually do something. That when you first call the police, that initial call when you're talking to the operator, that is in short the initial piece of evidence for any case, right? Because you call the police, that stuff is recorded. And look, I'm telling them like, look, I did not hit this lady, right? It's on the line. I didn't hit her. She's trying to say that I hit her. I didn't hit her. I'm sitting here waiting, so I don't got to deal with hit and run. And so when people are dealing with squatters, a lot of times they're saying, hey, you need to say someone broke in so we can come from like a criminal offense. And a lot of times, again, we talk about shootings and things of that nature, you don't want to lie on people, but also too, when you're dealing with this situation where you're trying to figure out how to get people out of your house in a timely manner while you're waiting in short for the laws to catch up. Because now all they're going to do is they're going to say you can say they're squatters and squatters is a criminal offense. And so you don't have to say someone broke in. But a lot of times in most of these states, it's just a civil matter when you say they're a squatter. So the position that you're putting the citizens and the police in, is a very dangerous one because again, you got people in your house and you can't kick them out because they're just squatters. It's a civil matter. You can't change the locks. Like then if you do that stuff, you change the locks on them. Now you're breaking the law, and it gets crazy. I remember in Maryland, not in Maryland, probably still the case, but in Maryland there was a time a handful of years ago, probably before the pandemic, and someone had broken into somebody's house. Right, so someone broke in, committed a crime. However, when they broke in, they like landed on something crazy and they broke through the window or whatever, and they like broke their ankle. The burglar sued the homeowners, I believe, for getting hurt. And it's like, what? How can you break into my house and I be liable if you're hurt? Like, what? Anyways, um, yeah, so that's just some of the crazy stuff out there. And again, these are at the state level. Again, deportations are at the federal level, but at the state level, when it comes to your property, imagine going on vacation for a week, 2 weeks, whatever, do some European trip or whatever, and you come back and you have squatters in your house. And you can't get them out for some days, weeks, or months because it's a civil matter. Like when it says if this were to frequently hit people at the primary residence level, people with HOAs, things like that, it'd be changed, immediately. But since a lot of times it's more renters, or should I say landlords, dealing with renters slash tenants, vacant homes or even completely vacant homes and nobody lives there, it's not that big of a deal. And then it's not to the point where it's so rampant. It's rampant because it's something that shouldn't be happening at all. But it's not to the point where it's so rampant that it's just taking over everything where it's like something that needs to be changed right away. But if you had somewhere where you had multiple HOA associations, housing associations, where HOAs where people were having squatters in their primary residencies, then yeah, you start seeing stuff getting changed a lot faster, at the state level or even at least at the county level, right? Because talking about sheriffs being enacted here. But I mean, these are the things we have all these various issues, right? Y'all worrying about, minimum wage getting increased. It's like, can we make it so people can't just squat in your house that don't live here? Like, how is it not a criminal offense if someone who isn't supposed to be in my house is in my house? I don't know this person with no contact ever with them, except now. Please get them out. Please say, no, this is a civil matter. You just got to take it to civil court. What? All right. Again, the bill for Oklahoma, the sheriff could remove them immediately. When this happens in Oklahoma, the process is getting right. Here we go. Civil courts, right? Yeah, it could be months to get the person out. Said forward, I'm hoping we can make this process of removal quicker and cheaper for the landlords. Ooh. I would say, it shouldn't cost. How much should it cost me? I call the police, they show up, they take them out, gone. Oklahoma House approved the bill earlier this month. It is now being considered in the Senate. Shout out to Oklahoma. Manufactured crisis, but Eric Dunn, director of litigation at the National Housing Law Project, which advocates for tenants' rights. See, these people aren't tenants. That's the issue. And if we're at the point where people can't separate, whatever word you want to use to say distinguish, whatever it is to say, there are squatters and then there are tenants, right? And the issue is, can a tenant become a squatter? Two different things. We're not talking about people who had a lease and then they staying over their lease. We're not talking about that. We're talking about people just showing up who've never been a tenant. It's two different things. But you want to say, oh no, this can infringe on tenants' rights. Well, good thing laws are just made up. So just make it up so we're not talking about tenants. If you can prove that you lived here and in short you stayed over your time, this law is not for you, where the sheriff is coming to take you out. Now, take you out. The sheriff's coming to take you out. The sheriff's coming to remove you from the property. Now that's a whole different conversation. But mainly the issue you're talking about is people saying, yo, this is a vacant home, and people just show up. And by the time I get to my house to, renovate it or sell it, whatever, we just got squatters in here, not a tenant overstaying their lease. All right, National Housing Law Project, which advocates for tenants' rights, called the anti-squatting bills, a manufactured crisis that exhibits the power of the landlord lobby in U.S. state houses. It's not that much power because all these states are dealing with this issue. If there was so much power on the landlord side, then why would we be dealing with this issue? They say people don't want to spend money on things they don't want to spend money on. Not people who have money, at least. The TikTok video gave some landlords cause to say we have a squatting crisis without any data or evidence or cause for there to be legislation to address a matter that's already handled by an eviction court. Dunn said, yeah, but if the time that it takes to do it, right? Or on top of that, if you're saying, it takes a long time because it's not a criminal matter, people don't want to hear that. Dunn said, it's one of those things, like, again, I always say you don't want to be patient at zero. A lot of times people only care about things when they hit their doorstep. Right? I do my best not to be that type of person. Like, I don't got no rental property, right? But I can look at the situation and be like, yeah, this needs to be fixed. And Eric Dunn here, director of litigation at the National Housing Law Project, people who have never lived somewhere, have no proof of residency, no mail there, no license there, nothing, no proof. Why are they in here? Get them out immediately. Call the police. They could get removed. Like, it shouldn't be that complicated. It's indicative of how Eric Dunn is saying, indicative of how well organized and connected landlords are in political circles and how effective they are in getting lawmakers to act on their behalf. Yeah, why wouldn't they? What is the theory? People who can't be in a property should be able to stay in the property? What? People who have no proof of ever living in the property should be able to stay in it? Chris, a transgender woman from Florida, said in an interview with State Line that her parents kicked her out of their home in 2022. She found a community of squatters online and has been on the road ever since. Chris, unfortunately, you got kicked out by your parents, but I need more information to say that you got kicked out by your parents. How old you got kicked out? All those different type of stuff. What was the reason for them kicking you out? What was the reason? Shout out to Cardi B. All right. She found a community of squatters online. How you find a community of squatters online if you got kicked out? How you still have internet access? You going to the library? Because if you get kicked out, right, of your parents' house, then where you're not working. But if you weren't working, how's your cell phone getting paid for you to find a community of squatters online? Did your parents give you a heads up and you found some squatters? All right, and she's been on the road ever since. Recent news coverage has been reckless and could embolden a property owner to hurt someone, said Chris. Again, that's the thing I'm bringing up too. Yes, the property owner said the landlord saying, I'll turn it to a criminal matter. Yeah, that's one of the issues too. They want people out of this house. You can imagine how, upset, how angry they can be, how much they're filled with rage. And, you can turn this into an actual criminal situation where people could get hurt and people might end up losing their lives. And that's the one thing too. If people start dying behind this, which I don't wish, but if people start dying behind it, yeah, you're going to see some change. Quicker change, more rapidly. Here we go. First time I said, oh, look at me doing better. Chris said they asked that they're saying they asked that her last name be left out for safety. Okay, cool. Traveling through states, including Tennessee and Texas on her way to Southwest, Chris said usually holds up. She usually holds up. They got hole here, like the movie. Should be hold, I think. Holds up in vacant buildings, never a home that appears occupied for up to 3 months. 3 months at a time. That's a quarter of a year. That's a whole season. She doesn't feel like she's a threat. I'm reading stuff on some sites saying the homeowners need to protect their homes and that squatters are just violent vagrants that need to be dealt with. She said it creates a dangerous environment where a majority of us who are only trying to find shelter in abandoned buildings are now enemies of paranoid homeowners. See, I think this is the issue. Abandoned buildings like office space versus a home. See, abandoned buildings, I would not use the phrase abandoned buildings in reference to homeowners, right? I wouldn't say you're trying to find shelter in abandoned buildings are now enemies of paranoid homeowners. I would not consider, a home by definition, I guess, can be considered a building, but a home is not an abandoned building if it's vacant. This is someone's house or was someone's house, and whoever the owner is, if it's not the state, you need to get. And that's the thing too. If these properties end up getting turned over to the bank, I wonder what the issue. If banks are having issues with removing squatters when they end up foreclosure on some of these properties. In most states, Republicans are leading the charge on anti-squatting legislation, but in at least one state, New York, Democrats on the forefront. Here we go, New York. All right, here we go. From Oklahoma to New York, from Texas, Florida, and Oklahoma to New York. New York Democratic State Senator Jessica Scarla Spanton, who represents Staten Island and Southern Brooklyn, acknowledged there is little data to support claims that squatting is on the rise or even that it happens that often. Okay, so here's the thing. It's one thing to say this is not an issue and thus we're not going to spend any more time on it from like a legislation standpoint, tax dollars, cool. But they're continuing to spend time on it. So just put the law in place saying people can't squat. That's the thing. If you're saying it's not an issue, we're not discussing it anymore, bring us that new data, cool. But if you're still going to continue to talk about it over time, then just go ahead and put the law in place. Because if the question becomes, should squatters get more rights? The answer, in theory, should be no, right? Now you're talking about people overstaying their tenancy, or they're overstaying their lease agreement. Is tenancy even a word? They're overstaying their lease agreement, and now there's some type of issue there where should they be able to get kicked out? Things like that. They lost their income, all these various type of things. That's different. For people who have proof of residency and can provide a lease agreement, people who cannot, or squatters, it should be one phone call to the police and then they're up out of there. Now, whether or not you want to, make this a criminal offense to the point where you press charges and things like that, and now you got more people, in the police pipeline as far as on the criminal side, that's a whole other conversation. But saying that squatters should be able to stay in a house for days, weeks, or months at a time, and now landlords have to provide, proof and spend money to get them out. Oh man. Scarlett Spanton told State Line that once is enough and that there needs to be a quicker way to remove squatters. Okay, cool. So, it sounds like she's saying there needs to be new evidence. So she's like, again, I don't read these articles ahead of time, but it sounds like, it's that statement right there. That quote is a good quote. Her proposal, which made it into the state's 2025 budget signed by Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul, spells out clearly that squatters don't have tenants' legal rights related to evictions. Bet. Proponents say that it will make it easier for police to remove squatters. Okay, bet. She's just saying it's not a big issue right now, I guess. Some people will make the argument that this is a very rare occurrence, but I think if it happens once or twice, it's unacceptable. Yeah, laws shouldn't be broken. That's why they're laws. So once you break the law once, get punished to the full extent of the law. It's unacceptable. Scarlett Spanton said it's always good to have data when we're trying to push legislation, true. But most importantly, I think that just seeing the cases that we've seen over the last couple of months in the news is reason enough to move forward with legislation. Okay, cool. So she's just saying there's no data. Oh, I'm reading this wrong. This is saying that Republicans are usually on the forefront, but in New York, they're Democrats. Well, New York that's a redundant statement. New York is a Democratic state. I can tell you that. All right, some landlords and property owners in blue states are hoping their lawmakers join the anti-squatting movement. In California, Cynthia Chindester's run-in with the squatter at her 95-year-old mother's home led to a prolonged legal battle that required domestic violence order to get the squat. Y'all, welcome to the Cory and FinallyFit podcast. I'm not saying like I'm I swear to y'all, I do not read these articles ahead of time. I told y'all it's going to turn to a DV situation where and California is one of the states I mentioned where if they show up on DV, somebody's going to jail. Again, in California, Cynthia Chidesters, how you pronounce Chidesters, running with the squatter at her 95-year-old mother's home. Again, I told you people dealing with situations with their parents. Look, prolonged legal battle required domestic violence order to get the squatter evicted in April. What do y'all want me to say? In an interview, Chidester says she wants lawmakers to take the issue more seriously, including passing laws to expedite the eviction process for squatters or unwelcome guests. And when it says expedite here, expedite should be, you call the police and it's done immediately. Like any other, in short, criminal offense. Like I said, DV, the laws for DV, I think, just copy and paste. If you're a squatter and you get called, and you can't provide any proof of residency, you gone. If you can't provide a lease agreement, even if you have a lease agreement that expired, 100 years ago, if you can't provide nothing that shows that you live here, you got to go. You're not even on the Wi-Fi. Never mind. My goodness. Right. When we look at your iPhone and where it says to take you home to this place doesn't show up right, on your maps, right? It'll, where you live at, quote unquote. If we can't look at your phone and this is where you've been spending most of the time at, over the last several months, no, I guess it's gonna be the last several months for some squatters. But a lot of times the squatters are being found, before that, it just takes forever to get them kicked out. Because, in long story short, let's say that you find a squatter, right, the day that they move in, but it's a civil matter, right? So the police can't take them out. They said they only been here today. The police like, we don't, it's hearsay. They saying they've been here longer than whatever the time is to get it removed. You're saying they're not, and neither one of you have evidence right now. So civil matter, you got to go to the courts. Then by the time you take them to court, they end up. By the time you get in court, they actually end up being there long enough to be that in short, quote unquote, have some type of tenants' rights, right? I mean, that's where it gets like real tricky and like crazy. It's like they haven't been here long enough. I called the police in time, but there's no proof to say they haven't been here long enough. By the time I get to court, they've actually been here long enough to say they have some rights to the property. Insanity. Alexandra Alvarado, Director of Education and Marketing at the American Apartment Owners Association Industry Group, told State Line that squatting has been a nightmare situation for landlords and property owners since the pandemic. I told you, pandemic timeframe when many offices emptied and vacation rentals sat vacant. Removal process needs to be more efficient with housing courts backlog since the pandemic, she said. Understandable in reference to the housing courts being backlogged. In our industry, squatting has been an issue. I think what's changed is the media's attention to it. Okay, interesting. Alvarado said, we think there's been a rise in squatting. It's difficult to show because we don't have the numbers, and a lot of these cases aren't handled much differently than a standard eviction case. So they're saying the eviction numbers have been going up though, right? But they haven't, I guess, been tagging them as like squatter eviction. What that sounds like. But Dunn of National Housing Law Project worries the recent bills could lead to a rollback of eviction protections. I wouldn't say you evict a squatter. You evict someone who had some type of tenant rights to the property, and for whatever reason they violated that paperwork. All right, a squatter is someone who doesn't have, shout out Dr. Umar Johnson, white man paperwork. Squatters don't have any paperwork, right? That's the conversation. When you don't evict a squatter, right? If they want to care so much about the verbiage, right? Or let's just call it squatter eviction, so you can delineate in the data. But sitting here trying to act like you're evicting someone who was never supposed to be here in the first place is insane. Landlords spanning 10 states and 34 cities filed nearly 1.1 million eviction cases in 2023, a year-to-year increase of more than 100,000 and 500,000 more than 2021. My goodness, that's double. Whew. According to Eviction Lab, a Princeton University research group that tracks evictions. It's called Eviction Lab at Princeton. What are they doing at these major universities? Shout out to the major universities doing the Lord's work out here, I guess, doing the data and research. It's not like tenants have great protections in the majority of states as it is. They're not tenants. And see this, Mr. Eric Dunn. Mr. Eric Dunn. See, you just combining things. Now, you're a lawyer, and you should be able to have a more in-depth conversation. But we're not talking about tenants here. Tenants and squatters, the verbiage has probably been interchanged. A tenant can turn into a squatter, but these people are talking about people who were never tenants in the first place. It behooves tenants to organize and pay attention to state and local governments when bills like these are proposed and pushed back, or they'll see their rights eroded by 1,000 cuts. Also, too, if you're in a position where you violate whatever your lease agreement is, how long should you get to stay there? A lot of people don't end up paying their rent. They don't lose their job. Like, okay, here we go. And people might not like this because it's housing. But when you're renting, right? Because this isn't a rent situation. We don't have this issue when we're talking about people who default or get foreclosed on when it comes to their mortgages. But you're paying a mortgage, you're paying rent, in short, you're paying money to someone to live there as long as you continue to make those payments. Rents, a year lease, 15 months, 18 months, whatever it is, right, 9 months, whatever it is, you got a lease agreement. With a mortgage company, you got the same thing. Your bank, whoever has your mortgage, got the same thing. It's just, you have a lot more leeway because technically you quote unquote own the property. You're not a renter. They're right. You have home ownership. Excuse me. But regardless, when people have mortgages, they get foreclosed on. What rights do you have? You can't live here no more. The same thing with renters. Regardless if you lose your job, obviously if you get disability, different laws come into place there. But a lot of times people just lose their job for whatever reason. It's not your landlord's or the bank's responsibility to have understanding when it comes to you losing your job. You're supposed to make these payments, and now you can't make the payments. And if you don't make these payments in a certain amount of time per whatever the paperwork you signed is, you gotta get up out of here. I don't know why we sitting there acting like all these people not paying their rent as far as tenants because they got disabled. We don't have all these disabled people. Talking about they need the data. We don't have all these disabled people out here to the point where it's impacting people not being able to pay their rent. All right, because we're saying tenants here, we're talking about renters. We're not talking about homeowners. Okay, Mark Rourke, law professor, University of Tulsa, back to Oklahoma, I guess, who studies squatters and homelessness, described the anti-squatters bill as low-hanging fruit for political points. It's a way for legislators to say, "Look, I'm doing something to protect your property," instead of any substain, su- substantive, substantive housing policy. Rourke and other housing experts found that squatters rarely gain ownership of a property. The question here is whether or not they gain ownership. It's the timeline and the fees that come along with getting them out of the property. In most states, the period of occupancy required to claim ownership ranges from 5 to 20 years. We're not talking about claiming occupancy. We're talking about the fact that someone is in your house in any form or fashion, and you got to pay money to get them out, and they don't need to get out immediately. Goddamn virus protection popped up and scared the shit out of me. Excuse my language, but like I was literally scared if you see me jumps because got a loud ass Windows noise. Anyways, however, Amy Starachesky. These names are crazy in this article, by the way. I am getting destroyed when it comes to these names. A cultural anthropologist at Columbia University, back to the Ivy League. I believe Columbia is Ivy League. Yeah, Columbia is Ivy League. Yeah, it's like Princeton. Okay, cool. Okay, Amy, who has documented the stories of squatters in New York City, noted that some who take shelter in derelict and abandoned buildings eventually do end up owning them. So many people are in the need of basic shelter, and there are people who are squatting intentionally to challenge private property as a legal and cultural institution, Starchesky said. This might be a moment when people freaking out about squatting are actually freaking out about access to housing and who gets to own a home and who doesn't get to own a home. Okay, cool. I was reading that quote then. A disclaimer. All right, again. All right. So this is anxiety over squatters fueled by TikTok inspires a wave of legislation. Opponents of the bill call the trend a manufacturer crisis that could affect legitimate tenant protections. Again, by Robbie Secure. All right. But before we end, we're going to go to a short article. And again, this is March of this year. The squatters hunter takes aim at tenants, at illegal tenants across California. So this is the squatter hunter. Okay. I don't know if you guys have seen this in California. In short, he was the same situation. I believe it was his mom's home and he was trying to do renovations, something like that. And then the people, they had squatters in there. And so in short, I believe he goes around helping people get squatters out of their property. So this is Flash Shelton, who has taken matters to his own hand when it comes to squatters, using his own experience with the legal tenants to help homeowners across the state of California. Affectionately known by many as the squatter hunter, Shelton gives squatters a taste of their own medicine as he looks to drive them out of the homes they've taken over without any real threat of legal consequence. All I'm doing, this is from Mr. Flash Shelton here. All I'm doing is becoming a squatter and flipping this process on them. Shelton said, I figured if they could take a house, I could take a house. This genius. He said, fine, I'll just be a squatter with the squatters. And then he ends up getting them out the house. Let's see how he does it, y'all. Shelton has been busy taking back properties across the West Coast for the last year, starting his mission after a squatter invaded again his mother's home that they were trying to sell. See, people are trying to sell homes and someone's like that. I don't understand. If I put a house up for sale, how can someone then squat in it and I have to go through any process outside of calling the police to get them out? Yeah, nobody's in here because I'm trying to sell the house. You don't like what are we talking about? There are no tenants rights here. We said we're trying to sell the house. If they want to buy it, they can put an offer. We ain't no issue sell. We trying to sell it. We're trying to get off our hands. Oh my goodness. In response, Shelton had his mother give him a lease for the home so that he can move in, making things very uncomfortable for the squatter. Again, they have to prove that the squatter can't stay there, but that he can still get a lease and live there. I'm not going in and I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not kicking them out. I'm not throwing them out, Shelton said. Instead, he's turning the tables, forcing those squatters to go to court in order to fight to get the property for themselves, as opposed to the homeowner having to go to court to get them out. Wow, so he's putting the pressure on the squatters. Interesting. And also, too, it's likely these squatters don't have any money. That's why they're squatting. Since posting his first video on YouTube more than a year ago, Shelton has been able to do it a dozen more times. He makes his way into homes occupied by squatters, squatting alongside them until he can force them to leave. He brings cameras recording every moment as he creates as many minor nuisances, as he can until they get fed up with him. So sure, he just becomes annoying to get him to leave. Interesting. Younger sibling tactics, I guess. Shelton says that the issue isn't isolated in California, that the United Nations estimates there are at least 1 billion squatters worldwide. So over 10% of the world population is squatting. How do they get it? There has to be a squat. There has to be a squatting issue then in California. I mean, California, in India and China to get to 1 billion people, because the issue is not. I mean, it's not like there's not 100 million people with squatters issues in the United States of America. That'd be over a third of the population. They think there's 1 billion people according to the United Nations. I would wish they had a link to that information. Let me see if I can find that. If the United Nations saying they have I mean, I guess everybody just says how many squatters they believe they have. Wow, that's crazy. I couldn't find anything. But I guess if all the nations just add up their numbers on how many people they think are squatting, then you get to 1 billion. That's crazy. That is crazy. As he continues to fight on his own terms, he's pushing for lawmakers to make things more official. Squatters' laws never were intended for residential properties. Boom, he said. Again, this is people talking about abandoned buildings. We're talking about residential properties here. We're not talking about office space. We're talking about or commercial, however you want to phrase it. We're talking about residential properties here. It's in the neighborhood. They were never intended to support break into someone. Again, so as I said, the verbiage the police say you need to use to break into someone broke into your house so you can make it a criminal matter. Sheldon contends that there needs to be a clear definition between tenant rights and squatters' rights. I think that's the clear definition right there, Mr. Shelton. Tenant versus squatter. All right. And people who can transition from a tenant to a squatter, let's make up a new word and say you don't transition from a tenant to a squatter, you transition to something else. All right. It needs to be separated out to where squatting criminal tenants serve civil process. Until then, he plans to continue helping as many homeowners as he can, pushing out those who don't belong. All right, y'all. Again, excuse me. Squatter hunter takes aim at illegal tenants across California. This is by Joy Benedict, CBS. All right, y'all. That's it. Locked and loaded. Shout out to the squatters out there. Not shout out to the squatters, but shout out to Kristen mentioned her last name, transgender woman who said that they got kicked out of their home in 2022 by their parents and somehow still has access to my assumption is you're working because you have money, I guess, to pay for your cell phone bill to access the internet. I don't know how you access the internet to get all this information. Right? That's always the confusing thing. People who don't have money but still have, resources. Right? I mean, how do you get the resources? Anyways, though, again, squatters' rights. We see in some states, more the conservative states. Shout out to New York, trying to make some progress. They got a lot of people in the city of New York, but it's just very interesting to see that there's a conversation. I know you got the tenants rights there. I mean, what's on the books is on the books, right? You can't just make up new laws, out of thin air when an issue is happening. But it's interesting to see that there's any friction. Shout out to Eric Dunn of the National. Where is he at? Eric Dunn, Director of Litigation at the National Housing Law Project, trying to make it seem like tenants are going to get their rights infringed on. Sure, if you want to say, because you're on the other side of the aisle here, to open up a can of worms by introducing squatters' rights, cool. But at the end of the day, this is about people who have no proof of ever living at this home and getting them out of the home. That's it. That's what people are complaining about. People are complaining about there are people in their commercial properties. That's not the case. These are people, again, as we saw with Flash Shelton talking about, hey, he's trying to sell his mom's home, and now there's people in there. Now he's to get a lease from his mom to go stay in the house so he can get the squatters out and be annoying. What are we talking about? Then the other person, they had the 95-year-old. Again, in California, Cynthia, against California, just like where Flash Shelton is at, Cynthia Chidesters has had an issue at her 95-year-old mom's home. And again, like I said before I even got to that part of the article, some way, one of the ways to get people out is maybe create a criminal issue, might be a DV. And literally, that's what the article said. They had to create a domestic violence situation to get the squatter evicted in April. And I mean, why do we want people fighting out here? We don't want people fighting because they're somewhere they shouldn't be. All right, it's y'all locked and loaded. Went a lot out of my my depth here. My trying to expand my breadth and my depth as far as it's tackling the squatters issue. But look, we try to discuss everything in between here. Obviously it's financial things. We're talking about housing, getting people evicted, things like that. But trying to expand the topics that we're covering on here to give you guys as much information as possible so you can truly see what's going on out here in the world, particularly the United States is the world we are like living in. We do got listeners, across the world. It's like, it's not like it's 100 of y'all, but unless people are on a VPN, maybe right to change their location. But again, shout out to the squatters out there. Shout out to people trying to get the squatters out. It's unfortunate for those of y'all in these situations where people should not, they have no legal right to your property. Now you have to spend all this money to get them out. All right. That's it, y'all. You need to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Shout out to the YouTube algorithm. Make sure you leave those rating reviews on the podcast platforms as well. My information, as well as my coach Jordan information, can be found in the description on YouTube. Jordan is Stop Stalling J on socials. His business page is FinallyFit.live, where you can sign up for the 5:30 a.m. virtual training sessions. And my information is silent_Cory. You can reach out to me for the financial coaching information. All right. Again, I gotta sit down and troubleshoot the my audio issues that I'm having as far as taking out of context to react to videos on here. So I still got to sit down, troubleshoot, and figure out how to get that working. Because now that if you want to talk about something that's piling up, that's piling up. And more shout out to the Hawk Tua girl, right? I mean, there's so much stuff that hits the internet, right? That I won't, not that I was going to cover that, because that's not something I will cover. But trying to get that working so we can have a different flavor of content versus me reading articles, so we can have the video / audio aspect coming in as well. All right. Remember, y'all, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, please reach out to us. All right. Remember to say more, say less. Keep making better your best. And I'll catch y'all in the next one.